Hi everyone, welcome to this special episode of A Happier Active. I think I'm calling it an inter-season solo episode, I guess, or the end of season one. So quite a few people have asked for a bit more about me because I guess my regular episodes are more about my guests. And so I thought this would be, I've been traveling this week. It's difficult for me to do my regular guest episode, so this is an opportunity for me to do that and tell you a bit about me and what I do, and then I'm going to answer a few of the kind of common things I get asked a lot, and tell you a bit about how you can work with me, the kind of things I do, and some stuff that I've got coming up soon. So I'm a health coach. I work with women in their 30s and 40s. I do work with some men, but it's more unusual. Most of my qualifications are in the female body, although obviously there are some things that are common to men and women. So I'm not against working with men, just don't do it terribly often. My health background is that, so I have a personal training qualification, and then I also have a pre and postnatal coaching qualification. So that gives me a lot of knowledge about what's going on in your body while you're pregnant, adjustments you need to make both for exercise and other stuff. And then more crucially afterwards, so things we can do to help, with the changes that happen because of your hormones, because of what's happened to you physically, because of what might be going on with your mental health, and how they all interact together. And then I have a health coaching qualification from the Integrative Women's Health Institute, and that includes functional nutrition, which is really important because I think often there's a lot of things that can be going on that can actually be, if not completely got rid of, really, really improved with functional nutrition, which is about addressing the root cause. So a lot of the times things like brain fog, things like, the things we would know like gut health, irritable bowel, constipation, but often other things, fatigue, functional nutrition can really help with a lot of those things. So that's why it's a useful thing to understand and know about how all these things interact together and how your physical and mental health work together to create this whole picture that is more complicated and not necessarily a one issue fix. My brand is called Happier Active, as you know, like the podcast, and that is because I think it can sound really trite to just say happiness is important, but often we use the things that we do that we think are good for our health are seen as punishment. So exercise and restrictive diets and all these things are like used negatively or as a punishment. It's much harder to do things when you don't enjoy them. And the kind of, goal of life is normally to try and get more enjoyment out of it. And so that's what I try and help people do. So it doesn't mean I'm like trying to deny difficult things or, when people have had something really horrific or traumatic happen to them, trying to find things that you enjoy can really help alleviate some of that. And I'm not adverse to talking about difficult things. My previous life, I worked in, homelessness, and I've worked in prisons, so I do understand like trauma, like really deep trauma, and I'm not afraid of it or talking about it or finding ways through it. So it's just about linking long-term health and happiness I find useful as a metric. Okay, so ways that you can work with people. How I work with people. So health coaching, the kind of big picture health coaching, one-on-one. I normally start by meeting people for like half an hour for free to talk about, what it is they're trying to get out of it, how long that might take, and how labor intensive it's going to be for me, because depending on people's goals, that's a completely tailored package. We just do that as by a cost per hour, but it's normally, so often people will work with me for like between 2 and 3 months, and we might start off speaking once, sometimes in extreme cases, maybe even twice a week, and then pare it down, and we'll try and set some outcomes, what we're trying to get out of it. And the aim is, in the long term, you're not going to need me because I'm going to help you get all these skills for yourself to get better. Now I'm trying to work on a group program because there are lots of studies that show that in group settings people do really well, and obviously it brings the cost down, but it's trying to work out how to do that in a way that I feel is ethical, because I do think that all this stuff is very individualized, and so figuring out how to get the balance of being able to tailor stuff really individually while still being in a group is a challenge that I'm working on at the moment. And just to say as well, I work with people with everything from pre-diabetes, sort of serious weight issues that are related to lifestyle disease, right through to women who are, the majority of people I work with are women in their 30s and 40s who are often dealing with the combination of high stress job, managing the balance with family, managing, feeling the burden of running the whole house and starting to get burnt out because they don't have time to prioritise themselves, and they can feel a crisis looming if they don't make some changes, but they don't know how to. And so that's kind of where I step in, and often how that crisis is showing up is by some health concerns, or that they don't have time to fit in exercise or eating better. So that's the kind of general thing, but I also have a couple of doctors who refer me people often in that pre-diabetes or heart disease realm as well. And I can do lots of things in between, because functional nutrition is pretty broad. And health coaching, it can just be mental health. Like, it's a broad church. And I'm happy to work with people's doctors and mental health team if that's needed, because they have specific, issues and needs. I'm more than happy to check in with medical teams about that stuff, because that can work really nicely, especially if you're trying to get off a medication and you need the lifestyle change to support not taking a medication. And then I have this goal setting course that I do, so people who don't feel they need health coaching, but I think we've all had the experience where we've tried to set a New Year's resolution, and by midway through January we're already not doing it. And that's not a personal failure, that's a failure to set the right goal in the right way. So I have a goal setting course. So how that works, it's $200. You meet with me virtually. It can normally be done in an hour. Some people need a bit more, and sometimes they need it to be split into 2 sections, because there's a bit in the middle where they really need to go away and reflect a bit and let things percolate and come back a week later. And we set some goals. We go through how to do it better, how to change how we're doing it. We break them down, and then we meet 3 more times, so every quarter. So, if you bought it in June, the last meeting would be, you'd meet me again in September, December, and then end of March, beginning of April. And at each quarter, we'd go through what's gone well, tweak how you're going to do things for the next quarter. And it's just that kind of constant accountability, recheck in, keep you going through the year, set them better, meet them better, all that stuff. Really good stuff, really important. Like coaching light, I'm going to call it. And that's been a kind of signature piece that I've done for a long time, and it's really popular. People really like it, especially if you think you're not sure coaching's quite for you, because you don't need that kind of full-on bit, but you would like some help. That's a good one. And then I also have a pregnancy course. It's only $40. It's just up on my website. I've tried to make it really cheap because I think it's really important. As I said, I work with a lot of women in their 30s. A lot of them have young children. And there are some common things that come up postpartum, some of which can be minimized with a bit of planning in pregnancy. It just doesn't happen. There's so much focus on the health of the baby. There's so much focus on, bouncing back, physical recovery, all this horrible stuff, but very little focus on things you can do beforehand to help strengthen your relationship, because the 4th trimester is a very challenging time for relationships, and things you can do to prepare yourself emotionally and to kind of set better foundations so that small problems don't snowball into big problems, which is something I see so commonly postpartum. So that's why I made that course. It's just standalone. It's kind of, I guess, a bit separate to the other stuff I do, but I think it's been quite helpful. It's difficult because I think it's a lot of things people think, oh, well, that won't happen to me. And then after the fact, these things are so common. That's why I just made that. But I tried to make it cheap and accessible because it's something I feel quite passionately about. And then on my YouTube channel, I guess the episodes of my podcast go up, but I also have a playlist of meditations, which I will just keep adding to. A lot of the feedback I've had from this podcast that's very kind is that people like my voice and they say it's relaxing. So, give the people what they want. Relaxing voice. Meditations. I've recently done my Reiki level 2. I'm not ready to offer that to people paid for yet, but it's a skill I'm working on, and I'm going to start offering it for free locally to kind of practice my new skills. So I guess if you're in Central Florida, hit me up. But otherwise, that'll be coming soon when I feel I'm ready to start offering that as a paid for service. If you want to know more about Reiki, I'm going to have someone on soon to talk about it more in a more articulate way than me. I'm in the process of writing some guided journals. If you do coaching with me, they will be part of the package, because they're just going to be about reflecting on ways to reflect better and to empower you to take charge of points of your life. And meditation and reflection are kind of commonly shown to be really good for stress reduction. And it's also going to help me be able to go to events and have a physical thing to sell rather than just a service. So I can go to vendor events and kind of get the word out. But the journals should be on Amazon fairly soon. Obviously, I'll go on about it loads when they're actually ready. And I've also made some little sets of affirmation cards and journal prompts to go with them, or to have separately, one for kind of helping people get grounded and one for overwhelm. And I guess I'll start adding some more to that as I go. And then that's mostly it for me. I have a Substack, which I haven't got completely the rhythm of yet. I'm just thinking about ways I'm going to do things. But I think one of the things that I'm going to do on that is put on a whole load of articles. It comes up loads in this, and I do get asked about it a lot as well, of kind of questions that people have about terms that people use that, you see on online thrown around loads. So people will talk about, HRV, they'll talk about different supplements, they'll talk about things you can measure, track, gut health, all these terms that get thrown out, and there's a kind of assumption that you know what they mean. So there's going to be some pieces like that are educational. I'm actually going to go back through old episodes of the podcast and pull out things that I've tried that the guests have suggested and how that went, and tips for you and practical stuff. And so some of that will be free and some of that will be paid for on the subscription on Substack. And then I'm going to have a monthly health book club, which will be starting in August because it's summer break at the moment, right? No one's got time to be reading for 15 minutes a day right now. I know in the UK schools go back in September, but here in the US, it's August, and most of my, sorry guys in the UK, but most of my people are here in the US with me. So August we're going to be starting, and 1st of August or that beginning of August, I'll let everyone know what the first book is going to be. But I think that'll be fun. It'll be a different book about health every time. They're all going to be ones I've not read either. So this is just as much for me as for all of you. And we'll talk about them at the end of the month each time. Okay, so that's really me in a nutshell, the kind of various things I do and have out there. So I'm just going to end this now by going through the kind of 3 most common kind of big, it was going to be individual questions, but they've pretty much all fallen into 3 themes, a lot of which are common things I get asked on, discovery calls or that first free consultation I do. So I thought I'd break everything down into these 3 groups, and I'll go through them. And then that'll be it. So a nice short one today. So the first thing I always get asked pretty much is a kind of variation on people coming because they want to lose weight. It's not always a bad thing. But weight is actually not a great indicator of health. Being really, really underweight is incredibly dangerous and very bad for your health. And obviously long-term obesity causes these long-term problems, that we know about: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, other issues. But they take a long, long time, and that's like a tanker turning around. Like severe chronic underweightness you can die from that pretty quickly. So just from that measure, like weight is not a great indicator of health. Often when you talk to people, if they've been very on restrictive diets and stuff, there's a lot of indicators that that's not been healthy. Their periods might have stopped, their hair might be falling out. So it's not a good indicator of health. I also think it's very negative. So if you listen to my podcast, you'll have heard me talk about this to other people. But, I'm trying to find ways to make people do stuff more happily. And often if people come and they say, I want to lose 20 pounds, they lose that 20 pounds and they still feel shitty because that wasn't really getting to the root of what the problem was. So I try and help people find health goals where a side effect will almost certainly be weight loss, especially if you are overweight. So the kind of exercise that you need to be doing, the kind of food you need to be eating, we work on those things. We might go and get a blood test done and make a goal around, lowering cholesterol, or there's all these different things you can do that are much better indicators of your health than your weight, because it's about what's going on in your body, not what a number on the scale is telling you. And that can be a bit challenging. We're so conditioned to think of weight and health being completely interlinked, and it's almost always more complicated than that, right? And that is the case even for people who've been referred to me by the doctor for chronic obesity. So even if you're, say, 300 pounds and you have very high A1C, it might be that we need to report those numbers as well to the doctor, because that's why you're there. And in those cases, that can be more important. But we would still make that a secondary part of the main health goal. So in that case, it might be we're going to be slowly building up our walking to help get our body moving, get our metabolism working better. And we'll be doing some food related goals as well. And the side effect of both of those would be weight loss. And in that case, we would still be reporting those numbers because that would be very important, especially if, for example, your insurance or someone else is paying for you to come and see me because it's become very serious. But even in those cases, I would still make the weight loss a secondary sort of sub goal of the main goal of health, if you see what I mean. So yes, that's my views on the scale. So the other thing that I guess I get asked a lot at the beginning is about what are the most important things for long-term health, because a lot of people, when they're coming for health coaching, they might have accomplished some of the short-term stuff and they're looking at longevity. So number one killer of women in the US, I think it's similar in the UK and Europe as well, but number one in the US by miles for women is heart disease. So your heart health is extremely important. So it just is. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Heart disease shows up differently in men than women, and it often gets missed. So that is awful and it's sad, and there's only so much we can do about that. And so it's even more important for women to be watching their heart health, because their heart disease might get missed until it's too late, or until something really serious has happened that's going to have other long-term impacts. Now, those of us who work in this field, not all of us, but a lot of us, are involved with lobbying and charities and other companies that are trying to work with the medical industry to better educate doctors, especially in ERs and things, and screening to stop stuff like this getting missed. But in the meantime, your heart health is so important, because if you get heart disease, it is so likely to be missed until it's too late. And it's the number one most likely thing to kill you. And then the second thing is your muscle mass, if you're a woman. Your muscle mass at 40 is the biggest indicator of what your quality of life is going to be at 80. That's not to say if you're over 40 it's too late. Far from it. But it's just when you take those two snapshots. So menopause makes it harder for your body to put on and keep on the hormones that your body's no longer producing, make your muscle atrophy more, makes it harder to stay on, and it affects your bone density. So the more muscle mass we have, the younger we are. As that starts deteriorating, the less there is, and also as it's harder to put on. You have to work twice as hard at 60 to put on muscle as you do at 40s. The more you can do it before, the better. But even so, women should be doing stuff to put on muscle mass if you want to have a healthy, active later life. So those are your two things, the most important things. Okay, then the third thing, and this is the big one, or a big one, not the big one, is I don't have any time. So what am I supposed to do? All right, women, it's a big problem. Like I said earlier, a lot of the people I'm working with, they're juggling work and family. And if you're in your 30s and 40s, you're often at the peak of your career. Your children are often at the ages where they take up the most of your time and energy, rightly or wrongly. Even in a house where there's a fairly even split of chores, still like mental load stuff falls on women, and we put ourselves last. So one of the things, and it comes up loads in the podcast, as if you're a regular listener you will know, but also it just, in all these things, there's loads of things you can do that will have big impact that you don't need to add in. You can do them at the time. So there's lots of like meditating and breathing things that you can do in your existing routine that are really helpful. Lots of things you can do while you're on the toilet. There's loads of breathwork stuff you can do while you're on the toilet, while you're driving, all this stuff. I try and help people find like fun ways to include their kids and stuff. There's kids yoga, there's all this stuff. And I'm a big believer in, you don't necessarily need to make time. You can include your family and stuff, and it's bonding. And it's fun, it can be. And it's not to say you don't also need your own time, but, The other thing is that often, when that's the case, and it is common, the first thing we're actually doing is taking stuff away, not adding stuff in. So a lot of the beginning audit is going to be around, okay, we're not actually putting anything new in, we're taking stuff away that's adding to your stress, that's not serving you, that's not helpful, that's adding to feeling overwhelmed, but doesn't actually need to be there. Long-term change isn't always about adding more and more new stuff. It's not about adding a green juice in and taking 20 minutes to stand on one leg humming. It can be a lot more practical than that and have big impacts. So that's something that can be a bit of a surprise to people at the beginning. And then I often find, actually taking 2 minutes to reflect, and that's why I've made these journals, and to just take a pause and reflect and be really more intentional about what we're doing. Often we actually get a lot more, you can use our time better because we're using it in a focused way. And that can be a good start, as well as helping to feel less overwhelmed, and then it can be easier to then start finding some extra time by replacing something that's not serving us with something that might start serving us better. But that is a big problem, and it's not an easy problem, and that's honestly often the biggest piece when I work with people one-on-one in the first month, because it's hard. And once you solve it, a lot of the other stuff becomes much easier because you've freed up some time, or you've worked out how to feel a bit less frantic and overwhelmed, and then with that clearer head, it's easier to then prioritize these changes that you want to make. And like I said, when people come, it's often because they can see they're heading towards a crisis and we're trying to head it off. And when you're in that state of feeling like you're about to break, or there's a huge crisis coming because you can't carry on as you are, it's often you need a kind of fresh pair of eyes to help you unpick the muddle. And so often the first month, sometimes a bit longer, of working with people is unpicking all of that stuff. And then everything else becomes a lot easier, and we see progress really fast often once we've found that little click. Yeah, so those are my 3 big things. Now, I'm going to end here, so it's going to be a nice shorter episode than normal. The one thing I would ask before I close out, it's a really good way that you can support me as a small business, is to rate and review this podcast, especially on Apple, because it just helps them. The more people review it and rate it, the more they'll start recommending it to other people. And as a small business, the way I get recommendations is through word of mouth and through people wanting to work with me because they've heard my stuff and they like me. So that's a really great way to support me without having to spend any money. And as ever, if you have any feedback, questions, if you have any topics that you might have heard someone mention something and you'd like to hear from someone who works in that way, let me know and I will do my best to find someone. And otherwise, that is it. Thank you and have a great week.